Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. And as always, before we get started today, I'd just like to take a quick moment to welcome all my new subs and to thank everybody who's been leaving me comments and messages down below. Thank you guys so much, I really appreciate it. And if you would like to take a couple of extra steps to help support the channel a little bit more, there's a merch store and a Patreon for this channel in the links below. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Okay guys, the time has finally come to release the complete story of the Titanic sister ship, the RMS Olympic. In the video you are about to watch, I have all 10 episodes of my Olympic timeline series cropped together into one episode. Now I'm going to put title dividers in between each episode so you know if you've transitioned from episode 1 to episode 2 to episode 3. And if you see me wearing different clothes throughout this video, you'll know you've transitioned from one episode to another. You have to remember guys, this video took me a month and a half to make, so you're going to see me wearing different clothes depending on which day I'm filming. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for all your support. And without any further ado, let's begin the story of the Titanic sister ship, the RMS Olympic.
Hey, if you like the Historic Travels YouTube channel, make sure you check out the Tales of the Protectors book series. Almost Heaven is Part 1 and The Elephant Path is Part 2. This is a young adult adventure series, and if you'd like the Chronicles of Narnia books, you will love these books. You can check out these books in the link in the description below. The story of the RMS Olympic begins before the ship was even built. You see, in the early 1900s, there existed massive competition between steamship companies in regards to them trying to persuade people to sail on their prospective ships if they decided they wanted to immigrate from Europe to the United States.
Now, in the early 1900s, there were many steamship companies out there that were all in direct competition with each other to try to get as much of the transatlantic crossing market as possible. You know, try to convince as many people as they can to sail on their respective ships. Although for this video, we're going to focus on two. More specifically, the Cunard Line and the White Star Line. Now, the White Star Line would be the company that would eventually end up building the RMS Olympic, although we'll talk more about that in a minute. So, let's talk about the Cunard Line for a minute here. The Cunard Line had a simple strategy in the early 1900s. They wanted to build not only the biggest ships in the world, but they also wanted to build the fastest ships in the world. So the whole idea around the Cunard Line was they wanted to have some ships out there that basically they were unmatched in the level of luxury that was on board these ships, but they also wanted these ships to be the fastest. So because the Cunard Line had this vision, they introduced two new ships in the early 1900s that would completely change the transatlantic market. These ships would be the Lusitania and the Mauretania.
In September of 1907, the Cunard Line revealed the Lusitania to the entire world. And at the time, this ship wasn't only just the biggest ship in the world, she was also the fastest, capable of crossing the entire Atlantic Ocean in just 5 days. And then, only a few months later, the Cunard Line wowed everybody again with the release of the RMS Mauretania. This ship was slightly bigger than that of the Lusitania, and it was also faster. So these two ships completely changed how people would traverse across the Atlantic Ocean if they wanted to immigrate from Europe to America. When the Cunard Line revealed the Lusitania and the Mauretania to the world, it was a huge blow for the White Star Line, because at the time their flagship vessels, the Majestic and the Titanic, were both completed in the late 1800s and were nowhere near the size or speed capabilities of the Cunard Line's brand new Lusitania and Mauretania. So it was clear the White Star Line, if they wanted to stay relevant, would have to do something huge in order to compete with these brand new flagship liners by the Cunard Line. J. Bruce Ismay, the head of the White Star Line, knew that if he wanted to keep up with the Cunard Line, then they would have to build a whole new class of liner. Although he decided to do things a little bit differently than Cunard Line. He decided, instead of trying to build the biggest and fastest ships in the world, he would simply try to build the biggest ships in the world, unmatched in their style and luxury and size. And with these brand new vessels, maybe the White Star could overtake the Cunard Line. Ismay then went and had a private meeting with William Peary, the head of the Harland & Wolff shipyard, at which Ismay discussed his plans for these whole new class of liners. Now, together, William Peary and Ismay planned out these brand new ships, and then they sought out to build the biggest and most luxurious ocean liners the world had ever seen to beat the Cunard Line's Lusitania and Mauretania.
Now, one very important thing to realize about Ismay. Ismay was not a shipbuilder, a sailor, or anything like that. He was simply a businessman who ran the White Star Line. So even though he discussed his idea of this new class of ship with William Peary, it was up to William Peary and his team over at Harland & Wolff to bring Ismay's vision into reality. So once William Peary knew what Ismay and the White Star Line wanted for this whole new class of ship, Peary then went and got other lead figures of his design team to begin helping him develop this whole new class of liner. The other key members of Peary's design team were Alexander Carlisle and Thomas Andrews.
Thomas Andrews, a naval architect at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, his responsibilities in the construction of this whole new class of liner had to do with calculating the design of this brand new ship, as well as managing the ship's stability and trim while this new vessel was at sea. Alexander Carlisle, the shipyard's chief draftsman and general manager, his responsibilities in this whole new class of liner had to do with the equipment that would be needed for the new ship, making sure everything ran smoothly on board, the decorations for the new vessel, as well as come up with an efficient lifeboat davit design, so if needed in an emergency, they would be able to lower the lifeboats from these vessels efficiently. But before work could even begin on this brand new class of liner, there first needed to be a space where these brand new ships could be built. You see, at the time, these ships were going to be so large that there wasn't a shipyard in the world that had enough space to build them. So Harland and Wolff had to completely tear down and design a brand new location within their shipyard where these new monstrous vessels could be built.
Now, I want you to think about that for a moment here. Just the whole idea that the Harland and Wolff shipyard had to go out and develop their own custom location within the shipyard to house these brand new vessels while they were being built is a true testament to the scale of this project that Harland and Wolff and the White Star Line was taking on as they attempted to build this whole new class of liner. Now, eventually, this whole new class of liner would become known as the Olympic class of ocean liners, and there would be 3 ships in the class. The first ship would be called the RMS Olympic, and then a few months after construction on Olympic began, work began on the Olympic sister ship, and that ship would become known as the RMS Titanic. And then a little bit after construction on Titanic began, the third ship in the class construction began. That ship would become known as the Rms Britannic. Although the RMS Britannic would never be because of the outbreak of World War I, this ship later became a hospital ship, so its official term was the HMHS Britannic.
Now, work officially began on the RMS Olympic in December of 1908, and then Titanic, work began on her soon after. Although it's important to note that at the time, these vessels did not have official names yet. You see, while a vessel is under construction, until it has an official name of its own, these ships are simply referred to as a hull number. So that means that whenever somebody was talking about the Olympic, they would call her by her hull number, ship number 400. And then if they were talking about Titanic, they would call that ship by her hull number, which was ship 401. And these would be the official designations of these vessels until the vessel's official name was announced.
Now, during the first year or two of construction on the brand new RMS Olympic, things were proceeding rather smoothly at the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Although, as time went on, it soon became apparent at the shipyard that they needed to solve a very critical problem with the RMS Olympic that they had yet to resolve. And that was, what kind of propulsion system would this brand new, monstrous ocean liner use to propel itself across the Atlantic?
Now, of course, when I ask what kind of propulsion system would the brand new RMS Olympic use, we all immediately think of it was a steam-powered ship, and you would be right. The Olympic and all other vessels of this time period were powered by steam. Basically, all these vessels had a bunch of boilers deep inside these vessels, and then firemen would shovel coal into these boilers, generating steam pressure, that in which in turn would run the vessel across the Atlantic. But when I asked the question earlier about what kind of propulsion system this brand new vessel would use, I was actually referring to the engines themselves that would be responsible for pushing the ship across the Atlantic.
So you see, in the time period before Olympic, all steamships used essentially the same type of propulsion system, which was called a reciprocating engine. And in a nutshell, what a reciprocating engine did was the steam pressure generated by the ship's boilers turned a piston, and then this in turn allowed the engines to spin the ship's propeller. Although, with the Cunard Line's Lusitania and Mauretania, the Cunard Line had introduced a brand new revolutionary engine known as the turbine engine. And this engine was unbelievable in terms of its performance. Although the White Star Line wasn't completely sold on the idea of the turbine engine for the brand new RMS Olympic and eventually the brand new RMS Titanic. Because where the Lusitania and the Mauretania had these turbine engines, they could go across the Atlantic very quickly. Although that wasn't the main goal of the White Star Line for these brand new vessels. And also, these engines weren't exactly efficient. Sure, the turbine engine was very fast, but it used a lot more fuel than the traditional reciprocating engine.
But even though the turbine engine wasn't exactly efficient in terms of fuel usage, the White Star Line was still interested in the technology and wondered if there was a way they could implement the turbine engine as well as the traditional reciprocating engine. So maybe they could try to find a way to keep the efficiency of the reciprocating engine and get some of the speed boosts of a turbine engine. But as luck would have it, while the White Star Line was developing the RMS Olympic, the shipyard at Harland and Wolff was also developing two new vessels for the Dominion Line, the Albany and the Alberta. And the White Star Line had it in their means to actually acquire these vessels and use them for an experiment in order for them to figure out what propulsion system would work the best on the brand new RMS Olympic.
So you see, the Dominion Line, just like the White Star Line, were owned by the International Mercantile Marine Company. But because White Star Line was the bigger company of the two, the International Mercantile Marine Company allowed the White Star to take these two vessels that were under construction for the Dominion Line and use them in an experiment to help them figure out what type of propulsion system would work best on the brand new RMS Olympic.
The White Star Line changed the SS Albany's name to be called the SS Megantic, and once the White Star Line got their hands on this vessel, they made sure to equip the vessel with two traditional reciprocating engines. The second ship the White Star Line took from the Dominion Line, the Alberta, had its name changed to be called the Laurentic, and it too was equipped with two reciprocating engines just like its sister ship, although the Laurentic had one major difference.
So the big difference the Laurentic had over its sister ship Megantic is that it had one extra engine that the Megantic didn't have. The Laurentic was still equipped with two reciprocating engines, just like its sister ship Megantic, which means it had two propellers on the back powered by two reciprocating engines. Although the Laurentic had one of the brand new turbine engines. So essentially, where the Megantic just had the two propellers on the back, the Laurentic looked more like the Olympic would once construction on it was finished. The Laurentic had two propellers on the back with one central high-speed propeller in the middle of the back of the ship that was powered by the turbine engine.
Then, once both these vessels were complete and they began to set sail, the White Star Line then kept an eye on how these vessels performed. They wanted to see if the additional engine added to the Laurentic would make the turbine engine worth it for all their future vessels. So they kept an eye on the Laurentic's speed, engine efficiency, and so on. And then they compared the performance of the Laurentic with its sister ship Megantic that didn't have this extra turbine engine.
And what made this such a great experiment in order for them to figure out if this central propeller would make such a huge difference between these two vessels is because the Laurentic and the Megantic were basically the exact same ship. So the only difference between the two was that the Laurentic had this engine and the Megantic didn't. So by comparing the performance of these two vessels with just the additional engine added to the Laurentic, they could see if this new engine would make a difference and if they should implement it on the new RMS Olympic.
And boy, let me tell you, what a difference that third central turbine propeller made when it came to the performance between the Laurentic and its sister ship Megantic. I mean, the Laurentic swam circles around the Megantic in terms of speed, the efficiency of the engines was top-notch. I mean, honestly, the Laurentic really showed the future of what this third central propeller powered by a turbine could do for the shipping industry. Now, the Megantic wasn't retired immediately or anything, it still had a career, although it was clear that the future in ship design involved a third central turbine propeller. So this design was decided upon and used on the brand new Olympic class of ocean liners. With the decision on what types of engines the Olympic would use having been decided, work resumed on the Olympic and construction went at a pretty reasonable pace. Now, even though they decided what types of engines these ships would use, it would still be quite some time before the engines were actually put inside the vessel. You see, before they could put the engines in the vessel, two things had to happen first. Number one, they had to finish the actual hull of the Olympic and get the ship out of the slipway. So essentially what a slipway is, when any new vessel is being constructed, the hull of the ship is built inside a slipway. And a slipway is a track system that allows the shipbuilders to actually slide a vessel into the water once construction on the vessel's hull is complete.
And you see, it was because of the slipway system that they had to use in order to slide vessels into the water that they had to wait until after the Olympic went down the slipway until they could actually put the engines inside of the Olympic's hull. You see, the big reason they had to wait is because in order to get one of these vessels to slide down the track the right way and gently slide into the water is because they had to have the weight right so the ship would evenly slide across the track. Now, if they would have put the engines in first, before they tried to slide the Olympic down the slipway and into the water, then that would create a huge weight difference between the back of the ship and the front of the ship, because you have to remember, before a vessel is slid into the water, she's just an empty shell. There's nothing inside the vessel. It's just the outline of the vessel's hull. Basically, the only thing the vessel has at that point is just the ability to float. There's nothing inside the ship that would make it a liner. And if they would have put the engines in the back before they slid it into the water, that would create a huge weight difference and cause the ship to slide unevenly down the slipway as it was going into the water. Maybe the back of the ship would end up grinding against the ground as it slid down. Maybe it would get jammed on the slipway and not slide into the water at all. There's 1,000 things that could go wrong if they tried to do anything before they got the Olympic into the water successfully.
Now, when the time comes to officially send a vessel down the slipway and into the water, this event is called a vessel's launch. The footage you are seeing here is colorized video of the launch of the steamship Oceanic, launched in the year 1899. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this footage gives you a great idea as to what the launch of a ship is like once construction on this vessel's hull is complete and the vessel is slid into the water. And in just under 2 years since construction began on the RMS Olympic, the vessel's hull was complete and the ship was ready to slide down the slipway and go into the water. Now, one thing to understand about the launch of a brand new vessel, it was a pretty public event. There was always a lot of press, a lot of families from people from the shipyard were present. It was a pretty big deal when a brand new vessel was sliding down the slipway and into the water. So William Peary, the head of Harland & Wolff, actually had the Olympic painted all white, so the ship would show up very well in the photographs taken of the vessel during the launch. And honestly, guys, it's a really good thing that William Peary had the Olympic painted all white for the photographs because of how well the Olympic's hull shows up in this very old footage. I mean, take a look at this. You are watching real footage of the Olympic sliding down the slipway and into the water. And remember, this video was shot in 1910, and look how clear it looks. I mean, you are actually watching the launch of the Olympic right now. And honestly, I just find that unbelievable. But yeah, the launch of the Olympic went without any problems. The vessel successfully made it down the slipway and into the water. And at this point, the Olympic was ready to be fitted out and be transformed into the liner she was destined to become. When we last left the RMS Olympic, the ship had just finished sliding down the slipway and was now floating in the harbor at the Belfast shipyard. Now, even though the Olympic is floating at this point, the ship is still just an empty shell. The Olympic still needs to have her engines installed, all of her furnishings, all the equipment that is needed to run this vessel, all that stuff still needs to be installed. Heck, the funnels aren't even installed on the Olympic yet at this point. It would be another 7 months before work on the RMS Olympic was complete. Now, during this time, the ship was equipped with her funnels, all of her interiors, her engines, basically everything this ship would need in order to live up to the dream of Bruce Ismay. And as work on the ship continued, everybody who worked on her soon saw the potential in what this vessel could be, the world's biggest and most luxurious ocean liner. Now, at some point during the construction of the Olympic class of ocean liners, Alexander Carlisle, one of the main designers of the Olympic class ships, got into an argument with the head of the Harland & Wolff shipyard, William Peary.
Alexander Carlisle was one of the main designers of the Olympic class of ocean liners. Him, along with William Peary and Thomas Andrews, all worked together to help design this whole new class of liner. Now, one of Alexander Carlisle's responsibilities on these ships was to handle the lifeboat situation on board, meaning it was his responsibility to figure out how many lifeboats would be required for the vessel, the launching mechanism for the lifeboats on this vessel, and so on and so forth. As Alexander Carlisle was figuring all this out, he was trying to figure out how many lifeboats would be required for these vessels. He checked what the law said was the minimum requirement for lifeboats on board these ships at the time. And the law said that any vessel that weighed more than 10,000 tons required a minimum of 16 lifeboats on board. So when Alexander Carlisle saw this, he thought, no, this isn't good, because these laws were written at a time when vessels that weighed only 10,000 tons was the norm. Vessels didn't really weigh much more than that at the time that this law was written. Now, the Olympic class of ocean liners, they weighed over 40,000 tons. So that meant that these things were much heavier and bigger ships than what was available at the time that this law was written. And Alexander Carlisle also knew that there was no way you could get how many people would be on these ships into 16 lifeboats. There was just no way to do that. So he went and talked to William Peary, the head of the Harland and Wolff shipyard, and expressed his concerns. But William Peary decided that as long as they met the law, they were okay. They didn't need any more than 16 lifeboats on board. Now, Alexander Carlisle strongly disagreed with this, but you see, William Peary was operating off the assumption that lifeboats were not necessary in order to completely evacuate a ship. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you see, in today's world, lifeboats are seen as a way to get all the people off a ship should a disaster occur. But in 1912, they weren't thought of in that manner. In 1912, lifeboats were only seen as a means to ferry people from one ship to another ship. So the whole idea is that if another ship was in trouble, there would always be another ship close by in order to come and lend assistance to this vessel, and then they would just use the lifeboats on these ships to ferry people from the damaged ship to the safe ship that came to rescue them or help them out. This practice or this strategy with the lifeboats actually worked out with another White Star Line disaster that occurred a few years before this
on a vessel called the Republic.
You see, when the Republic sank, it didn't have enough lifeboats on board, although other ships responded to it and they were able to use the lifeboats to ferry people from one ship to another ship. Although, even still, Alexander Carlisle strongly disagreed with this decision, and not long after that, he did leave the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Now, some documentaries claim that Alexander Carlisle left Harland and Wolff because of this argument between him and William Peary. But it's more likely, you see, at the time, Alexander Carlisle was having issues with his health, so it looks like he just took this opportunity to just retire for those reasons, not just because him and William Peary had an argument. But still, the Olympic class of ocean liners was the very last type of ship that Alexander Carlisle would help design. And in the end, it seems that the Olympic didn't sail with just 16 lifeboats. It does seem like William Peary did put an extra 2 boats on board. So the Olympic had 18 lifeboats on board at the time of its maiden voyage. And William Peary did do something similar with Titanic. You see, Titanic had an extra 4 lifeboats on board during its maiden voyage. So it looks like Olympic had 18 boats at the time, and Titanic had 20. So technically, both of these ships, even though they weren't required to do so, had more lifeboats on board than what the law said was required at the time.
As construction on the Olympic was nearing completion, work was also quickly progressing with the Olympic sister ship, hull number 401. Now this vessel was still in the slipway and it had yet to be launched. So the White Star Line planned to do a special event in order to celebrate the launch of the second ship in the Olympic class. And in case you forgot, ship number 401 would soon be named Titanic.
So, because construction on the Titanic's hull was nearing completion and the vessel was almost ready to go down the slipway and enter the water for the first time, and because final construction on the Olympic was almost done and this vessel was nearly ready to depart Belfast and head to Southampton to begin final preparations for her maiden voyage, the White Star Line planned to do this big publicity event in order to celebrate their accomplishment with these 2 vessels. The White Star Line decided to have the Titanic's launch occur on the exact same day that the RMS Olympic left Belfast for her maiden voyage.
Now, the White Star Line planned to have the Olympic leave Belfast and have the launch of Titanic on May 31st, 1911. But something had to happen before this occurred. The Olympic needed to undergo her sea trials and get licensed by the Board of Trade so she could operate as a passenger liner. This occurred on May 29th, 1911. And the sea trials went without any problems, and the Olympic was given her safety certificate, and the ship was now free to take on the world. It is Wednesday, May 31st, 1911. The RMS Olympic is preparing to leave Belfast, the city of her birth, and head for Southampton to begin final preparations for her maiden voyage. As the Olympic prepared to leave the city of her birth for good, crowds of people began to enter the shipyard in Belfast in order to watch the launch of the brand new ocean liner Titanic. It is estimated that there was somewhere around 100,000 people in the shipyard and in the area surrounding it that day in order to watch the launch of the brand new Titanic. And on Wednesday, May 31st, 1911, at 12:15 in the afternoon, the launch happened. The brand new RMS Titanic began to slide down the slipway and enter the water for the very first time. The launch went without any problems, and the RMS Titanic successfully entered the water. Now the White Star Line had one brand new ship that was preparing to enter service, and they had another ship that was getting ready to go through the final stages of construction and would be entering service in the very near future.
You know, if I was somebody that worked at either the White Star Line or for Harland and Wolff at this point in time, I would think the future is looking very bright for both of these companies. I mean, think about it from the White Star Line's perspective. They have just taken possession of the brand new RMS Olympic. This ship is getting ready to leave Belfast and head to Southampton for her maiden voyage, and at the time, she is the biggest and most luxurious ship in the world. And at the exact same time, her sister ship, the brand new RMS Titanic, has just been launched and entered the water and is getting ready to go through her final stages of construction. And when this ship is complete, it will be the biggest and most luxurious vessel afloat. I mean, how could you not think the future is bright for the White Star Line at this point? And for all those at Harland and Wolff, with the success of both of these two liners, this would signify Harland and Wolff's position as the world's greatest shipbuilder. I mean, even though the White Star Line had the vision of these ships, and it's their money that brought these ships to life, it was because of the men at the Harland and Wolff shipyard that both of these vessels came into being. And if it wasn't for all their hard work, then these ships wouldn't exist at all. I mean, honestly, if both of these ships have a successful career, I really do think that would signify Harland and Wolff's position as the world's greatest shipbuilding company.
And then, as the sun began to set over Belfast, the RMS Olympic steamed out of the Belfast shipyard and headed for Southampton to undergo final preparations for her maiden voyage. This day truly marked the beginning of a brand new era for both the Olympic-class ocean liners and the White Star Line. However, before the Olympic arrived in Southampton, the White Star Line decided first to have the Olympic go to Liverpool and spend the day there. Once the Olympic arrived in Liverpool, she would be open to the public, and the whole idea around this was to show off their brand new liner. Let people come aboard, let them see the ship, let people take pictures, etc., etc. The Olympic spent the entire day in Liverpool, and as the sun began to set, she steamed away, heading for Southampton. She arrived in Southampton Harbor on June 3rd, 1911. When the RMS Olympic arrived in Southampton, she was met with huge amounts of fanfare. People were so excited to see what was the world's biggest and most luxurious ocean liner. The ship pulled into the Southampton pier and began to take on all the supplies, personnel, everything this vessel would need to complete her first voyage across the Atlantic from Southampton to New York City.
Now, the Olympic would spend the next 11 days in Southampton undergoing all the preparations that this vessel would need for her maiden voyage. So during this time, all the personnel on the ship would be taking care of making sure the ship has enough food for everybody on board, getting all the personnel on board the ship, getting the ship all the fuel it will need for her maiden voyage, and so on and so forth. So these next 11 days were very busy for everybody who was working on board the RMS Olympic. And then, as the day of her maiden voyage approached, all the passengers would slowly start arriving in Southampton and begin making their way to the pier in order to board the RMS Olympic.
And then, on June 14, 1911, after taking on all of her supplies, passengers, and crew, the RMS Olympic finally departed Southampton to begin her maiden voyage. The ship made 2 quick stops, one in Cherbourg, France, and the other in Queenstown, Ireland, before heading out to sea, bound for New York City. The RMS Olympic, after years of planning and construction, the world's biggest and most luxurious vessel, was finally free to take on the world. When we last left the RMS Olympic, the ship had just departed Southampton on June 14, 1911 for her maiden voyage. Now, despite all the publicity and how popular the Olympic was with the general public, the ship was only half full during its maiden voyage. Although the Olympic did have one very special guest from the White Star Line on board the ship for her maiden voyage. J. Bruce Ismay, the head of the White Star Line, was on board the RMS Olympic for her maiden voyage. Now, he went on this crossing just to see how the Olympic would perform on this trip, and he also wanted to see what the public thought of the RMS Olympic, as this brand new revolutionary ocean liner completed its first voyage across the Atlantic.
And overall, Ismay was very impressed with the performance of his brand new ocean liner, and he wasn't the only one. All the passengers on board the Olympic were very impressed with the ship's performance as well. You know, even though it took the Olympic a couple of days longer to cross the Atlantic than Cunard's Lusitania and Mauretania, to make up for this, the ship was much bigger than those ocean liners. It had a much smoother ride because the Lusitania and Mauretania also suffered from vibrations due to their high rate of speed, but the Olympic didn't have that. And yeah, the ship was it was a marvel to see. It was a marvel to sail on her. The ship was unmatched in its luxury, its accommodations, and honestly, the future was looking bright for the White Star Line and the brand new Olympic-class ocean liners.
And on June 21st, 1911, 1 week after the Olympic departed Southampton, the ship finally steamed into New York City. The Olympic was met with great fanfare in New York City, as all the residents of the city came out to see this brand new revolutionary ocean liner. All the passengers on board the Olympic were excited about reaching their destination, and all the crew members on board the Olympic were very pleased at how this brand new ocean liner performed on her maiden voyage. Now all the White Star Line had to do was get the Olympic sister ship, the RMS Titanic, completed, and the White Star Line would finally have the two vessels they need in order to compete with Cunard Line's Lusitania and Mauretania. Over the next several months, things proceeded pretty smoothly with the RMS Olympic. The ship completed several voyages across the Atlantic with no major problems. Public opinion on this vessel was extremely high, so yeah, everything was looking good for the brand new ocean liner. Although in September of 1911, all that would change.
The first major mishap with the RMS Olympic occurred on September 20th, 1911. On this day, the Olympic was getting ready to begin her 5th transatlantic voyage and travel from Southampton to New York City. The Olympic departed Southampton with around 1,300 people on board, and the ship was going to make a quick stop in Cherbourg, as it had done before, and pick up more passengers. Although, the ship would never make it to Cherbourg. As it was departing Southampton Harbor, something unexpected occurred.
As the Olympic was steaming out of Southampton Harbor, the vessel accidentally got extremely close to a Royal Navy ship known as the HMS Hawke. The HMS Hawke was a warship designed and built for the British Navy, and you see, the Hawke had one feature on board that would make this situation with the Olympic extremely dangerous. The bow of the Hawke was designed to be able to easily slice through the hull of any vessel it came into contact with. And the reason it was designed this way was because if the Hawke was ever in a situation to where it could ram an enemy vessel, they wanted the bow to be easily able to slice through the hull of that ship, thus allowing it to rapidly flood and sink. Now, the Hawke was a much smaller vessel than the RMS Olympic, and due to how big the Olympic was and the amount of water she displaced, plus the close proximity between the Hawke and the Olympic, this caused the Hawke's bow to be sucked into the side of the Olympic. The Hawke's bow sliced into the Olympic on the starboard side right around the stern section, and the bow of the Hawke went right through the Olympic's hull like a knife going through butter, and this put a huge hole in the side of the Olympic, breaching 2 watertight compartments and causing them to rapidly flood. Okay, so before we continue talking about the Olympic Hawke collision, I think first we need to take a small pause and discuss how the watertight bulkhead system on the Olympic class of ocean liners functioned.
Now, the watertight bulkhead system on the RMS Olympic and the soon-to-be-completed RMS Titanic was very state-of-the-art for the time. You see, these vessels were designed with 16 watertight compartments, and any 2 of those 16 watertight compartments could be breached, and the ship would not be in danger of sinking. So that means, like, let's say the Olympic had a hole here and a hole here, the vessel would be fine. The ship could have 2 holes in the stern section, the ship would be fine. And here is another really cool design feature about the Olympic class of ocean liners. Let's say the Olympic was in some kind of a freak head-on collision with, I don't know, an iceberg, for example. Let's say on April 14th, 1912, the Olympic was sailing along and it struck an iceberg on the starboard side, and the iceberg opened up 4 of the Olympic's watertight compartments. Well, the ship would not be in any danger of sinking. The Olympic class of ocean liners could handle the first 4 watertight compartments, meaning the first 4 compartments at the very front of the ship. All of these could flood and the ship would not sink. Although it could only handle that much damage at the very front of the ship, it could not handle any more than 2 compartments breached anywhere else, because if it did, the ship would founder. Now, in terms of the collision with the Olympic and the HMS Hawke, when that happened, the Olympic had 2 watertight bulkheads compromised. So the captain on the Olympic, and at the time this was Captain Smith, the same Captain Smith that would later captain Titanic, he ordered the watertight bulkhead doors shut, and the doors shut and basically sealed off those two compartments, preventing the water from flooding the rest of the ship. So the Olympic really did just barely survive the damage with the Hawk. If just one more watertight bulkhead would have been compromised with the Hawk collision, the Olympic would have sunk.
Right after the collision with the HMS Hawk, the Olympic turned around and made her way back into the harbor at Southampton. Now, once the ship arrived in Southampton Harbor, they basically had to do some real quick repairs to the Olympic just to get the ship seaworthy enough so the vessel could make her way to the shipyard in Belfast, where she could undergo more permanent repairs. The HMS Hawk was also pretty badly damaged in the collision with the Olympic. As you can see in this photo, the entire bow section of the Hawk was completely smashed in the collision. But still, due to the quick actions of the crew on board the Hawk, this vessel didn't sink either. And this vessel would continue on and serve for a couple more years until the vessel would be eventually sunk in the First World War. Over the next 2 weeks, while the Olympic was still docked in Southampton, the crew worked tirelessly in order to patch up the Olympic's hull enough just to get the vessel seaworthy enough so the ship could proceed to Belfast for more permanent repairs. The work went without any major issues, and then once the vessel was deemed seaworthy, the Olympic weighed anchor and departed Southampton, bound for Belfast, the city of her birth, where she could undergo more permanent repairs.
Now, the financial burden on the White Star Line due to the collision between the Olympic and the Hawk was enormous. Not only was their brand new ocean liner not generating any income because it wasn't sailing the transatlantic crossing, but they also had to deal with the extensive amounts of repairs that the Olympic would need in order to get her back into service. So once the Olympic made her way back to the Belfast shipyard, her sister ship, the RMS Titanic, was undergoing her final stages of construction. It would still be a while before the Titanic was ready to set sail, but she was undergoing the fitting out process, meaning the Titanic's funnels were being attached, she was getting fitted with her engines, her furnishings, all of this stuff was going on. Now, because the Olympic was so badly damaged, and the White Star Line needed to get her back into service as quickly as possible, they ended up taking a part from Titanic in order to help speed up the repairs on the Olympic. You see, when the Hawk hit the Olympic, she hit the Olympic on the starboard side close to the stern section, and when this happened, it damaged one of the Olympic's propeller shafts. So, because the Olympic and the Titanic were near identical sister ships, the White Star Line took the propeller shaft from the Titanic and used it to repair the one on the Olympic.
Now, because the White Star Line was in a hurry to get the Olympic back into service as quickly as possible, they pulled men who were working on the Titanic and sent them over to work on the Olympic in order to speed up repairs. So, because of both the propeller shaft that they had to take from Titanic and the amount of men who were working on the Titanic had to be sent over to repair Olympic, this would delay the completion of the Titanic significantly. So that means while the Olympic was still being worked on, the Titanic would have to wait a little longer before she was able to enter service.
Now, repairs to the Olympic were officially completed on November 20th, 1911, and the ship officially re-entered service. And for the next few months, everything proceeded smoothly with the RMS Olympic. And once repairs on the Olympic were completed, construction resumed at full speed on the RMS Titanic. The White Star Line really wanted to get this vessel into service as quickly as possible. So, as the Olympic carried on, it resumed its transatlantic crossings route, and for the next several months, there wasn't really anything very eventful to speak of with the RMS Olympic, which in terms of controlling and running an ocean liner is a good thing. An uneventful crossing is a good crossing. However, all that changed in February of 1912, as the Olympic was steaming on a eastbound crossing from New York City, heading for Southampton. The Olympic threw a propeller blade. And as a result of this, the vessel once again had to proceed to Belfast for repairs.
When the Olympic arrived once again at the Belfast shipyard to undergo repairs, work began on her immediately. The White Star Line did not want the Olympic out of service for very long. Now, when the Olympic arrived, the ship needed a new propeller blade, and the only place to get one was once again from her sister ship, the Titanic, which at this point was nearing completion. Now, once they took the Titanic's propeller blade and put it on the Olympic, work proceeded very smoothly. The Olympic was able to get in and out of the shipyard in Belfast in a grand total of 8 days. But because the Titanic had to give up one of its propeller blades, this would delay the completion and maiden voyage of the Titanic. Before the ship had to give up its propeller blade to Olympic, the Titanic's maiden voyage was less than a month away. However, because it had to give up its propeller blade, this would in fact push the Titanic's maiden voyage back from March 20th, 1912 to April 10th, 1912.
Now, once repairs were complete on the Olympic, the ship departed the shipyard in Belfast and got back to work during the transatlantic crossing. The White Star Line really couldn't afford to have the Olympic out of commission for very long due to how many setbacks they already faced with this vessel. Now, once the Olympic left, work resumed in the shipyard on trying to complete the Olympic sister ship, the RMS Titanic. You have to remember, this ship is very close to being done, and the White Star Line really needed this vessel in service as quickly as possible. The White Star Line, in order to directly compete with the Cunard Lines Lusitania and Mauretania, really did need both the Olympic and the Titanic in service at the exact same time in order to directly compete with those two vessels. And due to how many setbacks the White Star Line had to deal with the Olympic and the Hawk collision and the propeller blade, it really was more crucial than ever for work to be completed on the Titanic and get this vessel to work as quickly as possible.
Over the next several weeks, construction on the RMS Titanic was completed, and finally, after years in the making, the White Star Line had both the RMS Olympic and its sister ship, the RMS Titanic, ready to go in order to compete with the Cunard Lines Lusitania and Mauretania. And on April 10th, 1912, the RMS Titanic departed Southampton, bound for New York City on its maiden voyage.
Now, at the exact same time the RMS Titanic was departing Southampton and heading towards New York City for its maiden voyage, its sister ship, the RMS Olympic, was in New York City, getting ready to depart there and head towards Southampton. Now, you see, this was the whole idea around the marketing strategy of the White Star Line in terms of how they wanted to operate both these vessels. They wanted, no matter which side of the Atlantic you were on, to always have access to one of these two ships. And then week after week, as these ships were doing the transatlantic crossing, the ships would basically trade places with each other on both sides of the Atlantic. So no matter which side you were on, you would always have access to either the Olympic or the Titanic.
Now, for the first several days into the Titanic's maiden voyage, everything was proceeding very smoothly on board the ship. All the systems on board the vessel were operating within normal parameters, and everybody was very happy with how this new vessel was performing. And the very same thing can be said for the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. Following the whole Hawk collision and this vessel throwing a propeller blade, finally the Olympic was operating as it rightfully should. So for the first time ever, the White Star had both the Olympic and the Titanic sailing on the Atlantic Ocean at the exact same time. Now, as far as the Olympic's eastbound voyage, everything was proceeding pretty smoothly on board. And then, on the night of April the 15th, 1912, the Olympic's wireless radio operator was listening to messages and sending messages from the Olympic. And then, all of a sudden, he detected a very strange distress call come through the Olympic's radio.
CQD, this is Titanic. CQD, this is Titanic. CQD, this is Titanic.
When we last left the RMS Olympic, it was Sunday, April 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m. The Olympic was steaming west from New York City, bound for Southampton, and up to this point during this voyage, it had been pretty uneventful. The ship was proceeding to Southampton at a good speed, the engines were operating normally, basically everything was well on board the Olympic. Although, all that can't be said for the Olympic's sister ship, the RMS Titanic. The Olympic's brand new sister ship, the RMS Titanic, which is currently sailing to New York City from Southampton, has just struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Now, even though the Titanic will begin to sink upon impact with the iceberg, it would still be quite some time before the Olympic knew the situation of its sister ship, the Titanic.
Now, there are two reasons as to why it would still be quite some time before the Olympic became aware of the Titanic situation. Number one, even though the Titanic struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, it would still be around a half hour or so before the Titanic would start broadcasting a distress call. I believe the first official distress call from the Titanic originated around 12:15 a.m. on April the 15th, 1912. Now, even though the Titanic would start broadcasting a distress call then, the Olympic wouldn't pick it up for still another half hour. I believe the first official message sent from the Olympic to the Titanic was around 12:45 a.m.
But even when the Olympic did try to contact the Titanic at 12:45 a.m., it wasn't replying to the Titanic's distress call. I will talk more about that in a minute.
But you see, the reason the Olympic would not pick up the Titanic's distress call right away was because of the distance that the Olympic was from the Titanic. You see, the way wireless technology worked at the time, or wireless radio technology worked at the time, was the further away a location was, the louder you had to have your radio set in order to hear the faint dots and dashes of Morse code from that area. Now, at the time the Titanic struck the iceberg, its sister ship Olympic was around 500 miles away from the Titanic. So at that distance, the dots and dashes from the Titanic, or from the Olympic to Titanic, would have been very faint, very hard to hear. So that's the main reason as to why it would still be quite some time before the Olympic would become fully aware of the Titanic situation. And it's also important to note that at 500 miles away, there is no way the Olympic would be able to help the Titanic. Even at full speed, it would take the Olympic somewhere around a day to reach the location at which the Titanic is sinking.
Now, there were a good number of ships that were much closer to the Titanic than its sister ship, the Olympic, was at the time of the sinking, and these vessels would pick up the Titanic's distress call much more quickly and much more easily than the Olympic would. One of these vessels is known as the Carpathia, and at the time of the sinking, it was around 58 miles away from the Titanic, and it would be this ship that would end up coming to the Titanic's aid and rescue the Titanic survivors. Although, as the sinking of the Titanic continued to play out, and the ship continued to broadcast its distress signal, more and more ships were beginning to clue into the dire situation that the Titanic was facing, and one of these ships would be the Olympic. Although the Olympic didn't clue in to the Titanic's disaster or current situation in the way that you would expect.
Now, at roughly 12:45 a.m., the Olympic did try to contact the Titanic, although it wasn't a response to the Titanic's distress call. You see, at 12:45 a.m., the Olympic, still unaware as to what's going on with the Titanic, tried to send a basic service message from this ship to the Titanic. It was just a routine message that ships send to each other. Although the Olympic didn't receive a response from the Titanic. But as the wireless radio operator on the Olympic was listening to all the other wireless messages that were going through the ocean that night, it seems like they were starting to clue into the situation the Titanic was in, but they didn't understand what was going on in full. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Anyway, after the Olympic sent the service call message and the Titanic didn't respond, the Carpathia did in fact pick up the Olympic service call message and then asked the Titanic, "Don't you hear the Olympic calling you?" And then Jack Phillips, the wireless operator on the Titanic, replied to the Carpathia, "No, I cannot read him for rush of air and noise of steam."
What Jack Phillips was referring to when he said he could not hear the Olympic because of the rush of air and noise of steam was all the steam on the Titanic being ejected through the ship's massive funnels. You see, at the time of the iceberg impact, the Titanic was operating under a full load of steam, and when the ship stopped, they had to get all that steam off of the ship, because if they didn't eject the steam and the steam pressure continued to build up, the boilers and the steam pressure could potentially cause the ship to explode. So for the next hour and a half or so after the ship hit the iceberg, steam was venting out of the Titanic's massive funnels, making communication on the ship extremely difficult. And this is why Jack Phillips was having trouble hearing the Olympic and other vessels that were very far away, because he was listening for the faint dots and dashes of Morse code from these ships, all the while listening to the massive roar of steam being ejected from the Titanic's massive funnels.
Now, even though the Olympic had yet to hear from the Titanic, even from its service call message that the ship had sent a little bit before, it was starting to clue in that something may be wrong with its sister ship due to other wireless radio transmissions that other ships were transmitting throughout the evening. So the Olympic then did try to contact the Titanic again, and this time Jack Phillips was ready, and he picked up the faint dots and dashes of the Olympic's wireless transmissions. So during this transmission, the Olympic asked the Titanic who had struck an iceberg. And Jack Phillips on the Titanic responded, "We have struck an iceberg and need assistance." So the Olympic then said okay and began making preparations to head towards the Titanic's location.
However, right around the same time that the Titanic and the Olympic were beginning to communicate with each other, there was another growing problem with this whole situation. You see, while the Olympic was trying to get more details into what was happening with the Titanic, several of the other ships that were close to the Titanic were all beginning to transmit messages over the wireless at once. Now, what you have to remember is, back then, there were no different radio frequencies or anything. Whenever ships start to communicate with each other over wireless, any other ship or transmitter in the area can pick up those transmissions. So, because all of these ships were trying to communicate with Titanic at the exact same time, the Olympic was having increasing difficulty trying to communicate with Titanic. It actually got so bad that the Olympic could not talk to the Titanic at all. So the wireless operator on the Olympic sent a message to all ships telling them to stop transmitting and to stop talking so it could talk to the Titanic. There's a really good video on YouTube called Titanic in Her Own Words that takes the dots and dashes of Morse code that were being transmitted that night and puts English text or English voices on them so you can understand what is being said. I will play a short audio clip from that video just so you get a taste as to what the Olympic and the Titanic were dealing with when they were trying to communicate with each other that night.
This is Olympic.
This is Titanic.
This is Virginian.
SOS.
Calling Titanic.
CQD.
This is Virginian.
CQD.
Calling Titanic.
This is Titanic.
Cape Race to Virginia.
SOS.
Report to your captain.
SOS.
The Titanic has struck iceberg and requires immediate assistance.
Received. Olympic to Titanic.
CQD. SOS.
Olympic to Titanic.
This is Titanic.
Carpathia to
We
Titanic.
have struck an iceberg and are sinking.
We are coming your way.
SOS.
Coming at full speed.
CQD.
Doing 15 knots.
Received.
Olympic to all stations. Virginian calling Cape Race. Olympic to all stations. This is Baltic. Stop talking. This is Baltic. Stop talking. Stop transmitting. Jamming. All stations stop talking.
Now, once the Olympic's wireless radio operator had finished sending that message to all those other ships did respond and stop transmitting, allowing much easier communication between the Olympic and the Titanic. Now, once this happened, Jack Phillips on the Titanic and the Olympic's wireless radio operator, they were doing a pretty good job at communicating with each other. So Jack Phillips took it upon himself to make sure that the Olympic was completely aware of everything that was going on with the Titanic, and he wanted to be sure that the Olympic was coming to their aid and completely knew the situation. And it did seem like Jack Phillips was succeeding, until the Olympic sent the following message. The Olympic asked the Titanic, and remember, it's like 1:30 in the morning at this point. The Titanic is rapidly sinking. But the Olympic asked the Titanic, "Are you steaming southerly to meet us?" And Jack Phillips on the Titanic just stopped transmitting. He literally just froze over the Morse key. And he was like, wait, what? Did the Olympic just ask us if we were steaming southerly to meet them?
So then, after pausing for a moment, Jack Phillips on the Titanic sent a very angry message to the wireless operator on the Olympic, because he was like, how on earth are they not getting this? And he said to them, we are putting passengers off in the boats. We are putting women off in the boats. Sinking. Just to try to make the wireless operator on the Olympic understand. I mean, just the whole idea of a sinking ship steaming southerly to meet the Olympic. I mean, Jack Phillips just could not comprehend that. And then it seems like after this, finally, the Olympic understood what was going on and began to make all haste to the location at which the Titanic was sinking.
Now, as the sinking of the Titanic continued to progress, all the ships, including the Olympic, that were in communication with the Titanic noticed something odd. You see, as more and more time went by, all these ships were having an increasingly hard time talking to the Titanic. Now, what was going on was, as the ship was continuing to sink, the power on board the Titanic was getting weaker and weaker. And the way wireless radio systems at the time worked was the more power you could feed into them, the farther they could broadcast a signal. And as the Titanic was continuing to sink, the ship's power was getting weaker and weaker, and it was getting more and more difficult for ships to hear the Titanic, until eventually the signal from Titanic died out entirely. And all that was left now were all the ships on the Atlantic wondering what had just happened to the Titanic. Now, at around 2:20 a.m., the Olympic then tried to reach the Titanic again, but received no response. So the Olympic then tried to contact other ships to see if any of them had heard from Titanic, and all the other ships told the Olympic that they hadn't. And as all of you know, 2:20 a.m. is the exact time that the RMS Titanic broke in half and slipped beneath the surface. So now all the people on the Titanic that weren't lucky enough to get a lifeboat are now beginning to freeze to death in the freezing cold waters of the North Atlantic. Now, the Carpathia officially reached the site the Titanic went down at roughly 3:30 a.m., and upon arrival, it immediately began work in picking up all the survivors of the Titanic disaster that were in some of the Titanic's lifeboats. Now, while the recovery effort was going on, all the other ships that were in communication with the Titanic were now talking to the Carpathia, and they were asking the Carpathia if they needed any assistance in recovering the Titanic survivors. And after a little bit of time, it quickly became apparent that the Carpathia was more than capable of rescuing everybody who had survived the sinking of the Titanic. So the Carpathia told all those other ships that assistance wasn't needed and for them to resume their course. Now, even after all of this, the Olympic still continued to steam towards the site of the Carpathia and the site at which the Titanic went down. And then when the Olympic got within 100 miles of where the Carpathia was, the Olympic then messaged the Carpathia and asked them if they would like them to take the Titanic survivors off of the Carpathia and transfer them over to the Olympic. Now, the crew on the Carpathia ran this by J. Bruce Ismay, who was on board the Titanic when she went down and is the head of the White Star Line, and he decided against it. He thought that if all the survivors of the Titanic disaster saw the nearly identical sister ship to the Titanic steaming up to them, he thought it would cause a lot of psychological distress in the Titanic survivors. So he decided against it. He told the Olympic to continue its course and that they would proceed to New York City on board the Carpathia. Upon receiving this message, the Olympic then resumed its course for Southampton. Now, as a token of respect to everybody who had just died on board the Titanic, for the rest of the voyage, the captain of the Olympic decided to not have the ship's band play any more concerts on board the Olympic for the rest of the voyage. In his mind, this was not a time to be celebrating or having fun or laughing and drinking champagne or whatever. You know, in his mind, a great tragedy had just occurred, and they need to take this time for the rest of the voyage to remember all of those and pay respect to everyone who had just died on board the RMS Titanic. Immediately following the Titanic disaster, the Olympic continued on to Southampton. She arrived at her destination on April 21st, 1912. Now, at the time that the Olympic was still continuing to Southampton, both the British and U.S. inquiries were getting underway, and they decided to use the Olympic over the next several months in a series of tests in order to test some theories into what could have caused the Titanic to strike the iceberg. More specifically, they did maneuverability tests. So basically, they pretended that there was an iceberg directly ahead of the Olympic, and then they ordered the ship to turn in order to time how long it would take the Olympic to miss the imaginary iceberg.
And the results of all these maneuverability tests that those guys did with the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, basically what that showed was, based on how well the Olympic could maneuver, they calculated that they only had about 37 seconds on the Titanic from the moment they saw the iceberg to the moment the ship began to turn, and how long it took until the inevitable collision occurred. So if you ever come across a book or an article that says it was 37 seconds between when the Titanic's crew saw the berg and to the point of collision, we actually don't know that for certain. All of that information comes from those tests they did with the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. The truth of the matter is, we don't know exactly how long it was between when the Titanic's crew saw the berg to the moment of impact. We have some pretty good educated guesses, but if you ever come across the whole 37-second thing, you now know where it came from. It didn't come from the Titanic. It came from the tests that were done with its sister ship, the Olympic.
However, as I said earlier, all those tests with the Olympic would occur over the next several months. But now I want to take a step back and go back to April 21st, 1912, right after the Titanic disaster, and talk about something that happened to the Olympic right after she arrived in Southampton.
One of the immediate outcomes that came from both the American and British inquiries into the Titanic disaster was a new law that was put into place that required all ships to now have enough lifeboats on board to accommodate everyone. And now the Olympic, just like its sister ship Titanic, did not have enough lifeboats on board to accommodate everyone. So when the ship arrived in Southampton on April 21st, 1912, the White Star Line quickly scrambled to get as many lifeboats put onto the Olympic as possible so her next crossing wouldn't be delayed. But because they were in such a hurry, they pulled lifeboats from wherever they could. And as a result of this, some of the members of the Olympic's crew were not happy with the selection of lifeboats that were provided to them from the White Star Line. And this, as a result, would lead to an event that would later become known as the Mutiny of 1912.
You see, because the White Star Line was in such a hurry to get as many lifeboats onto the Olympic as possible, most of the replacement lifeboats that they got for the Olympic were second-hand collapsible boats. And several of these lifeboats were not in good condition. Many of them had severe rotting, and they really were not seaworthy at all. So this led to 284 of the ship's firemen, who were all unionized, to go on strike until new lifeboats for the Olympic could be acquired.
So as you can imagine, the White Star Line's response to this strike went about as well as you can come to expect of this company. Instead of going out and trying to calm the strikers or settle the strike, the White Star Line instead just went out and hired 100 new crewmen to replace some of the ones they had lost in this strike. And as you can imagine, this only made the people who were striking even more mad. Now, eventually, the White Star Line would authorize a series of tests and sea trials to be commenced with these replacement lifeboats. This test was witnessed by several strikers, and it was witnessed by a member of the Board of Trade. They tested 4 lifeboats, and of those 4 lifeboats, only 1 was deemed to be unseaworthy. This did kinda calm the fears of some of the strikers, but not all. And the member of the Board of Trade who did watch this sea trial or test of these lifeboats said that in his opinion, it was okay that the strikers went back to work. So a good number of the strikers did return to work, but not all. Some of the other protesters wrote a letter to the head of the White Star Line asking if they could replace all these second-hand lifeboats with new lifeboats, but that just wasn't possible at the time. So it seems that all but about 50 or so strikers were calmed down at this point, and that they all agreed to return to work. But of these 50 or so strikers that refused to return to work, they were now not only protesting the lifeboats, but they were also protesting all of the new non-union hires that the White Star Line did. So they wanted new lifeboats, and they wanted all the new hire non-union employees to be fired, which of course this didn't happen. So eventually all of these men were arrested.
Now, I can already hear you guys in the comments section typing out, what do you mean these men were arrested? Weren't they just striking? On what legal ground could the White Star Line arrest them? Well, basically here's what happened. You see, all these men who were still protesting, they were all firemen, meaning they were the men who shoveled coal into the Olympics boilers. And when they said they weren't going to return to work, they all just got up and left the Olympic. Now, what made this so bad for the White Star Line was that the Olympic was due to sail on another voyage in the next couple of days. And when they left, this voyage had to be canceled because the Olympic did not have enough personnel on board to fuel the ship so it could make the transatlantic crossing. And this, on legal ground, was enough for the White Star Line to officially charge these men with mutiny, thus allowing them to be legally arrested.
Now, after these men were arrested, the police decided to let them go soon after, even though what all these men did does technically count as mutiny. Due to the special circumstances surrounding it, the police decided to just let them go without being imprisoned or without being fined for this whole mess. Now, after they were released, the White Star Line did not want to rehire these guys. They didn't want them back at the company at all. But the White Star Line was afraid that if they didn't rehire these guys, this could turn public opinion against the company. They were afraid that if they didn't rehire them, that this would sway the public to not want to sail on their ships as much. So the White Star Line officially offered these guys their job back, and the Olympic got ready to resume normal operations. Now, as far as I can tell, nothing else ever came from this strike. Following this arrest, this seems like it was the end of everything. And then once all these men got back on board, the Olympic resumed operations on May 15th, 1912.
For the next several months, everything continued smoothly on board the Olympic. The ship did several voyages across the Atlantic, and there were no major issues to speak of. But there were a few issues with the ship that the White Star Line wanted to get resolved post the Titanic disaster. Number 1, even though the Olympic did have enough lifeboats for everybody on board, the ship was not equipped with a good system in order to properly launch all of these lifeboats. And number 2, they had some ideas on how to make the ship safer, so if the Olympic was involved in a collision similar to what the Titanic went through, the ship could survive. So in October of 1912, the White Star Line decided to bring the Olympic into dry dock so they could retrofit the vessel.
You see, during this time period, the White Star Line was still working on the 3rd ship of the Olympic-class fleet that would later become known as the Rms Britannic. And when Harland and Wolff was designing this ship, they made several changes in the Britannic's design post the Titanic disaster in order to make the Britannic a safer ship. Now, it was a little bit easier to implement these changes on Britannic because this ship was still under construction at the time and pretty early into its construction when the Titanic disaster occurred. So, because the White Star Line liked these changes to Britannic so much, they decided to bring the Olympic in and in some ways replicate some of the changes that were being made to the Britannic and take those same design changes and put them on the Olympic, thus making the Olympic a much safer ship.
The changes made to the Olympic following the October 1912 retrofit are of the following. Number 1, the official lifeboat capacity on the Olympic was increased from 20 up to 68. Now, remember earlier in this video I stated that the Olympic did have enough lifeboats for everybody on board immediately after the Titanic disaster? But also remember that when they did this, it was basically a rush job. The lifeboats were stashed wherever on the boat deck. The Olympic did not have enough davits in order to properly launch these lifeboats, so the crew would have a heck of a time getting these boats into position so they could be launched in an emergency. However, all of that changed following the October 1912 retrofit. Immediately following the October 1912 retrofit, all of the lifeboats on the Olympic now had an official spot to sit on the boat deck. And not only that, all of the lifeboats on the ship now had their own davits. So now these lifeboats could be effectively and efficiently launched should an emergency arise on the Olympic. This retrofit basically solved all of the lifeboat problems that the Olympic had before the ship arrived in dry dock.
The White Star Line also made a good number of changes to the Olympic's hull and its watertight bulkhead system during this retrofit. The changes to the hull were they basically added a second layer to the hull around the boiler rooms and engine room of the Olympic. So basically they created a double hull around that area. And basically what that would do is, if the ship was to hit something around the boiler room or engine room, the hull was tougher in that area so it could withstand the force of impact better, thus reducing the risk of flooding. And another change they made was to the watertight bulkhead system. You see, before the retrofit, the Olympic had 16 watertight compartments, just like the Titanic did. But they added one additional watertight bulkhead, so they increased it from 16 to 17. And they also extended the height of the watertight bulkhead in 5 areas. They increased the height in 5 areas from E deck up to B deck. So if the water was to get into that zone, it wouldn't be able to spill over the tops of the bulkheads, just like what we saw with the Titanic disaster. So by implementing these changes, they basically had it set up so the Olympic could survive the first 6 compartments breached, which is the exact same amount of damage the Titanic had when it struck the iceberg. The Olympic could now survive that kind of damage, no problem. Fun fact, this is a very similar design that the White Star Line would later use in the Olympic sister ship, the Britannic.
They also made a good number of changes to the Olympic that would prove to be popular with the ship's passengers. They added a few more first-class suites that they found were very popular on the Titanic. They also added more cabins that had their own private bathroom facilities. Yes, believe it or not, having your own private bathroom on a ship back then was a novelty in those days. And then probably the biggest change that they did was they took a restaurant that was on the Titanic called Café Parisien and added it to the Olympic. So now all the first-class passengers on the Olympic would have 2 choices of where they would like to eat. They could eat either in the first-class dining room, or they could eat in the brand new Café Parisien.
The retrofit on the Olympic officially ended in March of 1913, and at that time the vessel would officially re-enter service. And for the next year or so, life went pretty smoothly on board the Olympic. The passengers enjoyed the brand new amenities, the ship operated just like the White Star Line wanted it to, and yeah, life was pretty smooth on board the Olympic and uneventful. Although there was one minor incident in early 1914 when the vessel encountered a very rough storm, and the rough seas and strong waves would end up breaking several of the Olympic's windows, and this storm would also injure some of the passengers on board the ship. But besides that one minor incident, everything was smooth on board the Olympic. That is, until July 28, 1914, when a little event called World War I would start. And this would change the fate of the Olympic for the foreseeable future.
On August 4th, 1914, World War I officially broke out in Europe. And if you were somebody who lived in one of the countries that was involved in the war, it was impossible for you not to be impacted by the war in some way. Everyone, every last man, woman, and child would be impacted by this horrible, horrible war. And the effects of the war wasn't limited to just people. All the businesses that were in the countries that were involved in the war would also be greatly impacted by how horrible this war was. And yes, this also includes the maritime industry companies like the White Star Line. And this war would also have a huge effect on ocean liners that would do the transatlantic crossings between Europe and America. So of course, this would also include the Titanic sister ship, the RMS Olympic.
Now, for the first couple of months of World War I, the Olympic continued to do regular passenger runs between Europe and the United States. Although, as you can imagine, the number of people going from America to Europe during this time was extremely low. Although the Olympic did have a pretty high number of passengers from the Europe to America crossing. Mostly this was just Americans that were living in Europe who were trying to escape the war and get back home before they ended up getting trapped in Europe, which was a real possibility. Remember, America didn't get involved in World War I for quite some time. But because the threat of German U-boats during this time period was so bad, the White Star Line decided to make a number of changes to the Olympic's appearance so they could try to minimize the risk that this ship faced with U-boats. Number one, they had the ship painted all gray. Number two, they had every single porthole window on the Olympic blocked out so no light could pass through it. And then number three, they turned off every single deck light on the Olympic. And the whole idea around all these changes was to try to make it as hard as possible for the captain of a U-boat to spot the Olympic through the submarine's periscope.
Although, as the threat of U-boats continued to increase as the war raged on, and due to low ridership, the White Star Line decided it just wasn't worth the risk or money to continue operating the Olympic during this time of war. So, on October 21st, 1914, the White Star Line had the Olympic depart New York, bound for Europe, for her last and final voyage of the war. It was the White Star Line's intention at this time period just to get the Olympic home, and then they would permanently dock the ship where she would wait out the war, and then once the war was over, the ship would then resume passenger services.
Now, just to give you guys a little bit of insight into how few passengers would be on board the Olympic during its final commercial voyage of the war, well, let me just put it like this. Under normal circumstances, like not wartime, the Olympic has a carrying capacity for close to 2,500 passengers, so that's operating under full load. But on its last commercial voyage of the war from America to Europe, the Olympic only had 153 passengers on board. Just think about that for a moment. Out of this entire ship, there was only 153 people on board. That's absolutely insane to me. Just imagine how creepy it would be to walk around the Olympic and honestly hardly ever see anyone. I mean, on a ship this big with only 153 people on board, honestly, the Olympic would feel like a ghost ship.
Although, despite the low ridership, life on board the Olympic was pretty routine during this voyage. The weather was good, the passengers enjoyed themselves, the ship made good time, and most importantly, the Olympic didn't encounter any U-boats. So honestly, in terms of everything that was going on, life on board the Olympic was pretty routine. Although, on the 6th day of the voyage, as the Olympic was passing Northern Ireland, the ship received a distress call. So the Olympic changed course to see if it could help out the stricken vessel. The distress call emanated from a British battleship known as the HMS Audacious. The HMS Audacious struck a mine not far off the Irish coastline, and the ship was rapidly taking on water. Now, when the Olympic arrived on scene, there were already two other ships attempting to help out with the Audacious, the HMS Liverpool and the HMS Fury. Now, what all three ships decided to do was to attempt to tow the Audacious in closer to the shoreline where they could attempt to save the stricken vessel. They made several attempts to attach tow cables to the Audacious and try to drag it closer to shore, although every single one of these attempts failed. Eventually, the Audacious began to rapidly sink, and it was decided then to abandon the ship, and the Audacious eventually went down. Once the Audacious sank, the Olympic picked up 250 survivors from the Audacious, and then the Olympic changed course and headed towards Ireland, where it would then attempt to drop off all of the Audacious's crew.
The British Admiralty was very concerned about the sinking of the Audacious. They were afraid that if news of this ship's going down would spread to the general public, that it would greatly demoralize them. And they were also afraid about this effect happening to their troops on the front lines. Because I'm telling you, one thing you definitely don't want in a time of war is for your troops to become demoralized. So what they decided to do was have the Olympic stay relatively close to the site at which the Audacious went down. More specifically, the Olympic was close to an area in Ireland known as Lough Swilly. So they had the Olympic held there in custody, and no one was allowed to disembark the Olympic, and there was a communications blackout from the Olympic. So basically, no one could get off, and there could be no communications from the ship. And they had the Olympic wait there while the Admiralty decided what to do. Now, as some time went by, people on board the Olympic were getting more anxious, and there were people on board the Olympic that had urgent matters to attend to in London and the surrounding areas. So eventually, the Olympic was allowed to proceed to Belfast, where all of its passengers finally disembarked.
The RMS Olympic arrived in Belfast in November of 1914, and it was the White Star Line's intention to just have the vessel remain here until the war was over. Although in May of 1915, the British Admiralty needed a bunch of troop ships. Now, at first they were hesitant to pull ships like the Olympic into service, especially because the sinking of the Lusitania had just happened. But the British Admiralty had a massive shortage in vessels at the time, and they desperately needed troop ships. So the Olympic, the Mauritania, and the Aquitania were all pulled in for military service. And eventually, the Olympic sister ship, the Rms Britannic, which at this point was still under construction, would also be used for military service, but it wouldn't be used as a troop ship. It would be used as a hospital ship.
Once the decision was made to use the RMS Olympic as a troop ship, the vessel went through a series of changes in order to transform the vessel from its peacetime self and turn it into the vessel that it would need to be in order to help serve the military in this time of war. One of the first things to change on board the Olympic was the ship was equipped with some guns, so if the ship encountered an enemy vessel or enemy submarine, the Olympic would be capable of defending itself. And then they also stripped the vessel of any luxury items that would make the Olympic resemble its peacetime self. So for example, they took out a lot of the Olympic's furniture, they also decreased the number of private rooms on board the ship, and all of this was done in order to increase the carrying capacity of the Olympic. And by doing this, they were able to increase the carrying capacity of this ship from 2,500 passengers all the way up to 6,000 passengers. Man, it's incredible how many people you can squeeze aboard a ship when you're not worried about, luxury stuff, accommodating passengers, and you just need to use it as a means to transport people from point A to point B. So by putting all of these people on board the Olympic, the British Admiralty could now get men where they needed them in order to help out with the war effort.
And then, once the wartime preparations to the Olympic were complete, the vessel then set out to begin its new life as a military vessel. The RMS Olympic was transformed into the HMT Olympic. For those of you who don't know, when a passenger ship is at sea and it has the title RMS, it stands for Royal Mail Ship. But since the Olympic was now a military vessel and had the title HMT, this stands for His Majesty Troop Ship. So, for the rest of the war, the Olympic would be known as His Majesty Troop Ship Olympic. On September 24th, 1915, the HMT Olympic began her first voyage after being transformed from a passenger liner into a military troop ship. On this voyage, she was carrying 6,000 soldiers, her maximum carrying capacity, from Liverpool to Murdos, Greece. All these soldiers were heading there in order to help assist with the war effort.
Once the Olympic became a troop ship, command of the Olympic was transferred to a new captain. His name was Bertram Fox Hayes. I hope I said that right. But what he and his crew didn't realize is that it wouldn't be long before they would all be tested by this war that was raging in Europe. You see, while the Olympic was en route to its destination, the crew on the Olympic spotted what looked like a French ship in distress, and they thought they saw sailors in the water that were in need of rescue. So the Olympic changed course and headed over to where this whole situation was unfolding. Now, what the Olympic had just sailed onto was a French ship that had just been torpedoed by a U-boat and sunk. So, the captain of the Olympic stopped the ship and successfully rescued 34 sailors from the water. If the Olympic hadn't been there, then these 34 sailors would have most definitely drowned after their ship had went down. Now, once these sailors were rescued, the Olympic raised anchor and continued on to her next destination. Now, once the British Admiralty learned that the Olympic stopped and rescued people from a U-boat attack, they were furious that this new captain had put the Olympic at risk by stopping the ship in an area where U-boats were patrolling. Because, honestly, the greatest defense that a ship like the Olympic has against U-boats is to stay mobile. However, the French government had a different view on what the actions of this new captain and the crew on the Olympic did. They were thrilled that the captain of the Olympic would put his ship at risk to save their soldiers. The French government awarded him a gold medal of honor. And for a while during World War I, the Olympic would continue to help operate in the Mediterranean, carrying soldiers where they would be needed for the war effort.
After the Olympic was done serving in the Mediterranean, there was much discussion with the British Admiralty as to where to send the Olympic next. They considered for a time sending the Olympic to serve near India. Although, upon further discussion, they decided that the Olympic was built to do transatlantic voyages in the Atlantic Ocean, so it would be best for the Olympic to stay there. Now, in early 1916, the Olympic was chartered by the Canadian government to start sailing between Halifax and Britain, carrying soldiers between Canada and the UK in order to assist with the war effort.
From the year 1916 to the year 1917, life was pretty uneventful for the Olympic. The ship continued to operate between the United Kingdom and Canada, and this ship successfully moved troops between the two countries. Now, even though nothing really big happened to the Olympic during this time period, one pretty cool thing did happen for the Olympic. The ship gained a new sister ship. That's right, for the first time since the loss of the Titanic, the Olympic finally had another running mate sailing with her at the exact same time. The Olympic's new sister ship would become known as the Britannic, although the official title for this ship would become known as HMHS Britannic. You see, where the Olympic was a troop ship, the Britannic was a hospital ship. So HMHS in front of the Britannic's name stands for His Majesty Hospital Ship. So throughout the entire year of 1916, both the Olympic and the Britannic would be operating at the exact same time.
However, the Olympic wouldn't have its running mate for very long. On November 21st, 1916, while the Britannic was sailing not far off the coast of Kia Island, the ship would end up striking a mine and rapidly begin to sink. Now, at the time of the sinking, the Britannic was only 6 miles or so away from Kia Island, so the captain of the Britannic would attempt to beach the vessel on the island itself. However, the forward motion of the ship just caused the Britannic to sink even faster. And then, less than an hour after the vessel struck the mine, the Britannic slowly sank to the bottom of the sea, leaving the Olympic alone to be the only one of the Olympic class still doing her duty and sailing on the ocean. Following the loss of her sister ship Britannic, the Olympic continued to operate between the UK and Canada. Although in early 1917, it was decided that the time was right to upgrade the Olympic and give the ship a few new features that may help defend the Olympic against a U-boat attack. The Olympic was equipped with a few more gun turrets mounted to the ship's deck, so the Olympic would be better equipped to defend herself against an enemy vessel/U-boat, and the vessel was also painted in a new paint scheme. Do you see all these weird lines and patterns that are all over the Olympic's hull? Well, this was the second upgrade she got that could potentially help defend the ship against a U-boat attack. This paint scheme was known as Dazzle Camouflage.
You see, Dazzle Camouflage was made up of not just all those weird symbols you saw, but it was also made up of a variety of colors as well. The colors were basically a form of gray, light blue, dark blue, white, just to name a few. And the purpose of all of these weird symbols and colors was to attempt to confuse the captain of a German U-boat should he be trying to observe a vessel on the horizon. You see, the way U-boats work is German U-boats were much slower than any vessel that was sailing on the ocean at the time. And the only way that a U-boat could attempt to fire or torpedo at an enemy ship was to attempt to observe the vessel, figure out what its course was, and then the U-boat would try to get ahead of the vessel, and then when the ship got within range, the U-boat would fire a torpedo. This is exactly what happened with U-20 and the Lusitania in 1915. U-20 saw the Lusitania coming, and believe it or not, at first the Lusitania was sailing in a direction where U-20 could not intercept it. But then at the last second, the Lusitania changed course and then started steaming right towards where U-20 was, giving the U-boat the perfect opportunity to fire a torpedo at the Lusitania. So that goes back. Now let's go back to the Olympic. You see, Dazzle Camouflage was an attempt to disrupt the ability of a U-boat captain to judge the course of a ship. Basically, all of these weird symbols, patterns, and colors created an optical illusion which made a U-boat captain think that a ship like the Olympic was going to be here, so the U-boat gets into position to fire. But then as the ship gets closer, it turns out the Olympic was actually over here, keeping the ship out of range of a U-boat so the U-boat could not fire a torpedo at whatever ship it was targeting.
Throughout the rest of 1917, the Olympic, equipped with her brand new gun turrets and Dazzle Camouflage, continued to sail the transatlantic route between the United Kingdom and Canada. Although one big thing did happen for the Olympic in April of 1917. America officially declared war on Germany, and Olympic was one of many vessels that was used to transport troops from America over to the UK to help join the war effort. By the time the war was over, Olympic had successfully transported thousands of soldiers from the United States over to Europe.
The final major event to happen to the Olympic during World War I occurred in the early hours of the morning on May 12, 1918. The Olympic was heading for Cherbourg, France with a full load of American soldiers on board who were ready to join the war effort. However, the lookouts on the Olympic spotted a German U-boat roughly 1,600 feet or so ahead of the Olympic. They let everyone on the ship know that there was an immediate threat in the area, and they began to respond accordingly. All of the guns on the Olympic began to open fire on the sub, and the captain of the Olympic had the ship change course, and they were going to attempt to ram the U-boat. If the bow of the Olympic was able to ram the U-boat, the bow of the ship would go right through the hull of the U-boat like a knife going through butter. I mean, it would slice it apart. So the crew on the U-boat saw the Olympic heading straight towards them. So the U-boat crew attempted to dive the submarine and get it out of range of both the Olympic's guns and they wanted to keep it from getting rammed by the Olympic. However, they attempted this dive too late. Part of the Olympic's hull made contact with the U-boat's hull directly behind the sub's conning tower. Although, while this severely damaged the sub, this didn't breach the sub's hull enough to cause the submarine to sink. However, the death blow to the submarine occurred by the Olympic's portside back propeller. You see, the Olympic's backside port propeller sliced right through the submarine's hull, allowing water to rapidly flood and basically crippled the submarine. The crew on the U-boat blew the sub's ballast and brought it up to the surface and began to abandon ship. Now, the U-boat crew didn't want this submarine to be able to be captured by the Americans, the British, or whoever. So once the crew abandoned the U-boat, they scuttled the sub and caused it to sink. Now, the Olympic did not stop to go back and rescue the survivors from the U-boat. The Olympic carried right on, heading for Cherbourg, France. However, some of the U-boat crew would launch a distress flare, and this would be noticed by a U.S. ship, and this ship would come over to pick up the U-boat survivors.
After the incident with the U-boat, no other major incidents happened to the Olympic throughout the rest of World War I. The ship continued to operate normally, transporting soldiers and cargo wherever they were needed to best suit the war effort. Then, in November of 1918, World War I officially ended. By the time the war was over, it is estimated that the Olympic transported somewhere around 201,000 soldiers to their destinations. The ship burned a grand total of 347,000 tons of coal, and the ship traveled a grand total of 184,000 miles. Due to how well the Olympic served during her time in war, everybody who knew the Olympic and sailed on her gave the ship the nickname Old Reliable. So now you know the story of how the Olympic served during her time of war and how essential she was to help end the war as quickly as possible. If it wasn't for the Olympic, it's quite possible World War I could have went on much longer and many more people would have died in that horrible, horrible war. In August of 1919, the HMT Olympic, still rocking her military Dazzle Camouflage paint scheme, proceeded back to Belfast, where the ship would be transformed once again from the troop ship configuration back into the passenger vessel configuration the ship had before the outbreak of World War I. Now, this trip to Belfast wasn't just to restore the Olympic's original appearance before the war. The ship would also go through a series of upgrades to make the vessel, number one, operate more efficiently, and number two, the White Star Line wanted to modernize the ship's interiors a bit, so the ship wouldn't seem old or antiquated to all the passengers that would soon be sailing on her.
Of all of the upgrades the Olympic received during this trip to Belfast, the most significant was a massive overhaul of all of the ship's boilers. You see, up until now, all of the boilers on the Olympic burned coal as fuel, so the ship could, generate steam so the vessel could sail across the Atlantic. But during this trip to Belfast, every single boiler on the Olympic was reconfigured to burn oil instead of coal. This in turn would make it much easier for people to maintain and operate the Olympic, and it would help the Olympic run much more efficiently.
There were a few other improvements made to the Olympic by having this vessel burn oil instead of coal, one of which was the amount of time needed to refuel the ship between each voyage. You see, when the Olympic ran on coal, it would always take several days between each voyage to completely refuel the ship. But now on a new oil-based fuel system, the amount of time needed to refuel the ship was reduced from several days to just a matter of hours. So that improvement alone is huge, and it's another significant reason as to why the White Star Line decided to convert the Olympic to oil burning instead of coal.
And quite possibly one of the biggest changes of all that came to this ship by having this ship burn oil instead of coal was the amount of personnel needed to now run the vessel. You see, having the Olympic be an oil burner meant that it was much easier to run this ship. So much so that the White Star Line didn't need anywhere near as many personnel on board the Olympic to run it. You see, when this ship was a coal burner, it would take around 350 men shoveling coal and working in the engine room to successfully get the vessel to operate and sail across the Atlantic. But now, as an oil burner, the amount of staff needed to fuel and run the ship could be reduced from 350 now down to only 60.
Now, while the conversion work on the Olympic was underway and the vessel was in dry dock, the personnel at the Harland and Wolff shipyard noticed something odd on the Olympic's hull below her waterline. While they were examining the hull, they found what looked like a pretty substantial dent in the ship's hull with a pretty big crack in the middle. Now, at first, they didn't know what to make of this, although with a little bit of investigating, the true horror of what they were looking at soon came to light.
As it turns out, what this dent in the hull represented was that at some point during the First World War, as the Olympic was sailing along operating as a troop ship, the ship had in fact been struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat. And this torpedo that hit the Olympic was defective, so when the torpedo hit the Olympic, it didn't detonate. All it did was put a pretty substantial dent in the Olympic's hull. Now, historians in later years have been trying to figure out exactly when this torpedo attack happened. And from what I could find, and I couldn't confirm this, so if you know for certain, please let me know in the comments below, but a historian believes that the torpedo was fired by U-boat U-53 on the 4th of September 1918, while the Olympic was operating in the English Channel. Now, as I said, I can't confirm or deny this is just something I found in my research, but if you know more information about it, please let me know in the comments below. But regardless of what U-boat fired the torpedo at the Olympic, what this really does say is that the Olympic was definitely one lucky ship, and she really did earn the nickname Old Reliable.
And then, in June of 1920, all the upgrades were added to the Olympic and the vessel was once again ready to enter passenger service. Now, one quick fun fact about the ship after these upgrades were complete. In terms of tonnage, all of these upgrades to the ship had made the Olympic heavier, and this in turn allowed the ship to claim the title of the world's largest British-built passenger liner. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this was just in terms of tonnage, not overall size. The Cunard liner Aquitania was still a bit longer than the Olympic, but the Olympic was a heavier ship.
Now, not only was the Olympic currently the world's largest British-built passenger liner afloat, but the vessel actually proved to be pretty popular with the general public. In one voyage alone in the year 1920, it is estimated that the Olympic carried over 2,200 passengers. And that's pretty surprising to me that so many people would want to sail on the Olympic, given that a good chunk of the world was in a state of recovery after the outbreak of World War I. But even so, this popular trend of the Olympic continued over into the next year as well. In the year 1921, it's estimated that the Olympic carried over 38,000 passengers in that entire year. And that is very impressive to me. However, with how impressive these numbers were for the Olympic, the White Star Line still thought they could do better. And they weren't happy with these numbers because the Olympic was operating by itself. The numbers that the White Star Line wanted would be much more obtainable if the Olympic had two running mates. Remember, this was supposed to be the Titanic and the Britannic, but both of them sunk. So the White Star Line wanted to get two more vessels to be running mates for the Olympic. And as it turns out, they were about to get them.
In the year 1922, as part of war reparations, the country of Germany ceded two German-built passenger vessels to Great Britain and the White Star Line. These two passenger vessels would soon become known as the RMS Homeric and the RMS Majestic. These two vessels would become the Olympic's new running mates, and the three of them would continue to operate transatlantic voyages between Europe and America. And all of these vessels would prove to be very popular for the foreseeable future. And finally, the White Star Line had the three ships that they always wanted when they first conceived of the Olympic class so many years ago.
And it was definitely perfect timing in the part of the White Star Line in order to get this fleet of ships to help accompany the Olympic as it was doing its transatlantic voyages across the Atlantic. Because during this time period, the 1920s were in full swing, sometimes referred to as the Roaring Twenties. The 1920s saw massive changes throughout the world. This was a time of innovation. The world was getting brand new technologies, the music style was changing, the economy was booming, so people had more money, and there was more people wanting to immigrate from Europe to America. So this was definitely the perfect time for the White Star Line to have a pair of running mates to help accompany the Olympic in the transatlantic crossing. Now, as it also seems, this is also the time period where the Titanic actually got its first wave in popularity. You see, one of the major attractions to the Olympic was that it was the sister ship to the Titanic. So a good number of people wanted to sail on the Olympic so they could get a taste and experience what life may have been like on the Olympic's ill-fated sister ship, the Titanic.
And for the next couple of years, life would be pretty uneventful for the Olympic. The ship would continue to do transatlantic voyages between Europe and America, and would continue to be a pretty popular vessel for anybody wanting to do the transatlantic crossing. Although it wasn't all smooth sailing for the Olympic. On March 22nd, 1924, as the Olympic was backing out of New York Harbor, it was involved in yet another collision. A smaller vessel, known as the Fort of St. George, accidentally crossed paths with the Olympic as the ship was backing out of the harbor, and the Olympic's stern crashed into the Fort of St. George, causing significant damage to the vessel. Now at first, it appeared that the Olympic only sustained minor damage, but upon closer inspection, it turns out the ship did have some major damage that needed urgent replacing. So the Olympic once again had to go and get repairs done before the ship could continue operating the transatlantic voyage.
Now, in the 1920s, another hardship was dealt to the Olympic and the White Star Line, and this would significantly reduce the number of people that would sail on this ship. And that was a change in the U.S.'s policy in regards to how many immigrants would be allowed to enter the country each year. You see, at some point in the mid-20s, the U.S. changed its laws regarding this, and they reduced the number of immigrants allowed to enter the country to around 169,000 a year. That was the number of immigrants that would be allowed to enter the country, regardless of what ocean liner company they sailed with to get to America. So this in turn really reduced the number of people that would be sailing on the Olympic. Now, the White Star Line was trying to figure out what to do because this was really damaging their profit margin. So what they decided to do was now cater to not just immigrants, but also to the tourist industry. So what they decided to do was make a brand new class on the Olympic specifically targeted at tourists. Now, before they made this change, there were 3 classes on the Olympic: first class, second class, third class. And the amount of money you paid for your ticket determined what class you were in on board the vessel, and it also determined the type of accommodations you got on board. This brand new class was called Third Tourist, and this class was targeted at tourists. And the whole point of this class was to give people some luxuries on board the ship without the high ticket cost. Because if you're traveling on vacation, you don't want to be in a really, really tiny cabin. You want to have some luxury with it. That way you can relax and enjoy your stay. And this change proved to be pretty successful, and slowly but surely the number of people that would sail on the Olympic began to rise, and the ship was once again proving to be somewhat profitable for the White Star Line.
Now, the third tourist cabin class was officially added to the Olympic at some point between the years of 1927 and 1928. And once this class was officially added to the ship and brought online, this is when the White Star Line began to notice both their profits increase and the number of riders on the Olympic begin to go up. And things operated pretty smoothly for the Olympic for the next year or so. Shoot, the year 1929, the Olympic saw its best ridership since the year 1925. So things were looking up for the White Star Line and the Olympic. That is, until October 1929, when a certain global event would occur that would change the fate of both the Olympic and the White Star Line forever. On October 24, 1929, the stock market crashed, signaling the beginning of the Great Depression. This would be one of the worst economic disasters in human history. Jobs were lost all over the world. In one day, on the day the stock market crashed, the U.S. lost more money than what was spent throughout the entirety of World War I. Unemployment was at a record high. People were struggling just to provide food for their families. So as you can see, this would have a great impact on businesses, and this would also include the White Star Line and the operations of the Titanic sister ship, the RMS Olympic.
In the years leading up to the crash of 29, the White Star Line was already having issues with getting passengers on board the Olympic. You see, the popularity of this ship was slowly starting to fade around 1927, 1928, because the public was getting interested in these brand new German and French liners that were currently being developed. People preferred to travel on these fancier, newer ships than they did the Olympic. So the White Star Line was already having issues. And this was only made worse by the crash of 29. When the Great Depression hit, it was a huge blow to the shipping industry, and that also means it was a huge blow to the Olympic. You see, before the crash of 29, total number of passengers per year on all ships, there averaged around 1 million passengers that were doing the transatlantic voyage each year. Now remember, this means all ships with all shipping companies per year, not just the White Star Line. But After the crash of 29, this number dropped by half. So now you have roughly 500,000 people doing the transatlantic voyage each year. And then on top of that, you have a huge amount of increased competition for the Olympic. So all these newer, fancier ships are trying to steal passengers from the Olympic, and the Olympic was having a more and more difficult time keeping its ridership up during this difficult period. So honestly, the future wasn't looking that good for the Olympic at this current time. So yeah, the future definitely isn't looking very good for the Olympic at this point, although things are about to get much worse. You see, what everybody on board the Olympic didn't realize is that in less than a month after the crash of 29 occurred, the Olympic and all of those who sail on her would soon bear witness to one of the worst natural disasters in Canada's history. On November 18, 1929, the Olympic was steaming west from Europe, bound for New York City, when all of a sudden, at roughly 5 p.m. in the afternoon, the ship began to vibrate and shake violently. Now, this shaking continued for roughly 2 minutes, and the shaking was so bad it was knocking cabinets over on board the Olympic, dishes were falling off the tables on the ship, people were stumbling and wobbling around. They had no clue what was going on. Then after the 2 minutes of shaking was up, everything returned to normal, the ocean quit vibrating, and the vessel continued on without any major damage. So now, that begs the question, what was this shaking? So, as it turns out, when this shaking began, the Olympic was sailing very close to the general area at which the Titanic went down. So I'm sure some of the passengers on board the ship thought it was an iceberg. And they may have went up on deck and looked around, didn't see anything, and then they were like, okay, that was weird, and then just continued on with their lives. So that begs the question, what was this? As it turns out, the Olympic was extremely close to the epicenter of a massive underwater earthquake. More specifically, this was the famous 1929 Grand Banks earthquake. And this earthquake would soon send a massive tsunami towards Newfoundland, where it would do an unimaginable amount of damage to Newfoundland's coastline. Now, the tsunami generated by this earthquake was huge. There were reports of bigger waves as far south as South Carolina. But keep in mind, the damage in these areas was minimal, if there was any at all. I couldn't find any record of any damage. But still, Newfoundland definitely did get hit the worst. And out of all the coastlines in Newfoundland that was affected by this tsunami, the worst was the Barren Peninsula, because this is the landmass of Newfoundland that was closest to the earthquake's epicenter. Around 2 hours after this earthquake struck and the Olympic had its little shaking, that tsunami struck Newfoundland, washing away any houses or buildings that were on the coastline closest to the earthquake. It's estimated that around 27 to 28 people were killed when this tsunami hit, and this tsunami left thousands homeless. So, as you can plainly see, this tsunami was definitely a horrible, horrible natural disaster.
For the next couple of years, things didn't really improve much for the Olympic. The White Star Line was still having issues getting passengers to sail on this ship due to how antiquated she was by modern-day ship standards. And due to the crash of 29, there was a huge decrease in ridership. And you also have to remember the increase in competition for the ship due to all the newer ships that were being built. Before the crash of 29, the Olympic was averaging around 1,000 passengers per transatlantic voyage, a far cry from the maximum carrying capacity that this ship could handle. Under maximum load, the Olympic could hold around 2,500 passengers. But after the crash of 29, this number decreased by more than half. So that means that each transatlantic voyage of the Olympic was now carrying roughly 500 passengers.
At the end of 1932, with ridership on the Olympic still extremely low, the White Star Line decided to bring the vessel back into dry dock, where they would attempt to modernize the ship a little bit so the public wouldn't think this ship was so antiquated. So basically all they did during this dry dock was they just changed around the ship's interior. Changed some rooms around a bit, added a few more staterooms. They modernized the ship a bit. I did find one picture of a very popular room on the Olympic before this retrofit, and then I found a picture of it after. The grand staircase, the most beautiful room on the Olympic class ships in my opinion? Well, somebody had the bright idea to paint it green. Why? Why would you do this? I would love to talk to whoever made this design decision and give them a piece of my mind. I mean, honestly, the grand staircase is one of the most iconic rooms on the ship. Why would you paint it green? How could you? Anyway, But yeah, this retrofit took 4 months, and the Olympic was then put back into service around March of 1933. However, these changes really didn't help much. The Olympic continued to operate at a loss, and the year 1933 was one of the worst years ever for the Olympic. And in this total year, the Olympic only carried around 9,000 passengers. Remember, this ship has a maximum carrying capacity of 2,500 per voyage, and in the total year, she only carried 9,000 passengers. Despite the low ridership, the year 1933 was a pretty uneventful one for the Olympic. The vessel continued to operate smoothly, and there were no real issues with this vessel as it did its transatlantic crossings. However, that can't be said for the year 1934. In May of 1934, the Olympic was approaching New York City, more specifically May 15th, 1934. And as the vessel was approaching New York Harbor, it was roughly 11 a.m. or so, a very heavy fog moved in, greatly limiting the visibility of the Olympic. Now, when this happens, these ships use what are called light ships to help navigate into a particular harbor. For those of you who don't know, light ships are basically, think of them like portable lighthouses. These are vessels that are positioned outside of major seaports, and the purpose of these light ships is to help guide ships into a particular harbor. So in the case of this particular day, due to this heavy fog, the Olympic was in radio communication with a light ship. More specifically, it was light ship Nantucket LV-117. And the crew on the Olympic were honing in on this light ship's radio signal to help guide the Olympic into New York Harbor. Remember, the fog is so bad that the Olympic's crew could not see New York City, and they could not see this light ship. However, the Olympic's crew made a fatal mistake. Instead of turning away from the light ship signal as they got close, the Olympic continued straight ahead towards the light ship. And by the time they realized what was going on, it was too late. The light ship emerged from the fog directly in front of the Olympic, and the Olympic's bow sliced right through the middle of the light ship, slicing the vessel in half and causing it to begin to rapidly sink.
Now, the Olympic wasn't at all damaged by this collision with the light ship. However, even though they did stop the vessel immediately after impact, where the Olympic sliced the ship clean in two, half of the light ship was on the Olympic's starboard side and the other half was on the Olympic's port side. And with the vessel split in two, she sank in less than 30 seconds. Now, there were 11 men on board the light ship, and of those 11 men, 4 men could not escape the vessel and went down with the light ship. The Olympic's crew managed to rescue 7 men from the water. However, 3 more died from their injuries. So in total, there would only be 4 survivors from the Nantucket lightship collision.
Boy, I tell you, the Olympic definitely did have a difficult time throughout its career in terms of how many vessels this ship would collide with. And you know, to be honest, when you really think about it, I'm amazed that this vessel even made it to her eventual retirement and scrapping. I mean, think about how much this ship went through, and she survived all of it. I mean, I tell you, the Olympic definitely did earn the nickname Old Reliable.
When we last left the RMS Olympic, the ship had just collided with the light ship in New York Harbor in the year 1934. And although the Olympic wasn't that badly damaged, even after this collision, the future wasn't looking too bright for this vessel. You see, in the year 1934, the Great Depression was still well underway, and the entire world was facing economic hardships. And this, of course, was also felt by the White Star Line and the Cunard Line. Now, in order to combat this, both companies decided that they wanted to build these brand new, massive vessels, but they did not have the financial means to do so. So both the White Star Line and the Cunard Line went to the British government, and they both attempted to get a loan so they could complete these vessels. The British government agreed to do this on one condition, that both the White Star Line and the Cunard Line would merge together and form a brand new company called Cunard White Star.
Now, at the time of the merger, the Cunard Line was in much better operational and financial state than the White Star Line was, so the Cunard Line would end up owning a majority of this new company. More specifically, the Cunard Line would own 62% of the new Cunard White Star Company, while the White Star Line would only own 38%. So basically that means the Cunard Line was going to be pretty much in charge of this new company. Now, when all these White Star Line ships began getting merged into the new Cunard White Star Company, the Cunard Line really wasn't interested in keeping these older ships. They were really wanting to look to the future and not the past. So many of these White Star Line ships were quickly sent to the shipbreaker yards to be disposed of. and unfortunately this would include the Titanic's own sister ship, the RMS Olympic.
Now, the agreement to merge Cunard Line with the White Star Line was officially completed on May 10, 1934. However, it would still be another year or so before the Olympic was officially retired. In that time, the vessel continued to operate during transatlantic voyages. However, this vessel never regained the popularity that it once had. The Olympic was withdrawn from transatlantic service on the 5th of April, 1935, and this was also the day she left New York City for the last time. She returned to Britain, and she would be laid up in Southampton for a while the company considered what to do with the Olympic.
Now, even though I stated earlier that the Cunard White Star Company wasn't that interested in preserving older ships, it does seem like they were at least somewhat concerned with the fate of the Olympic. Because even though this ship definitely wasn't as popular as it used to be, the ship still did have some popularity among the public, mostly because this ship was the sister ship to the ill-fated Titanic. You see, I believe that in the 1930s, the public saw the Olympic like we see the Queen Mary today. The Queen Mary isn't a huge tourist attraction, but among ocean liner enthusiasts, the Queen Mary is an icon that should be saved and preserved. But we'll talk more about the Queen Mary later. Anyway, back to the Olympic. So several ideas were thrown around as to what to do with the Olympic, and the Cunard White Star actually considered keeping this ship operational and using her for summer cruises. Man, how cool would that be? Can you imagine if they actually used the Olympic for summer cruises? Like, maybe have this vessel and keep this vessel around as a moving museum or a historic museum. I mean, can you just imagine how cool it would be if this ship somehow survived to today? And we could actually see this ship operating like every now and again, kind of like the USS Constitution. You know, they take out the USS Constitution every now and again. However, these ideas were quickly abandoned, and they decided that the Olympic wouldn't be good for summer cruises. So they were trying to decide once again what to do with her. And then a potential buyer came along who thought that he would take the Olympic and turn it into a floating hotel, much like the Queen Mary today. Man, I keep referencing the Queen Mary, don't I? But again, nothing really came of this. So honestly, the future isn't looking very good for the Olympic.
It would be another 5 months before the ultimate fate of Olympic was decided. During that time, the Cunard White Star Company couldn't find anybody who was willing to take on the task of preserving this ship. So with no other plans in the works for the future of the Olympic, it was ultimately decided that the vessel would be demolished. So, around 5 months after the ship arrived, the Olympic was then told to proceed to the city of Jarrow, where a shipbreaking yard awaited it. Here, the Olympic would be demolished and broken up, and her steel and other valuables would be sold for scrap. Now, while it is very sad that the Olympic would eventually be scrapped and demolished, the vessel arriving in the city of Jarrow would bring work for over 100,000 workers who were suffering from economic hardship due to the Great Depression. So while it is a very sad end to one of the most famous ships in history, just think about how much of a blessing the arrival of this ship was for the 100,000 workers who were suffering due to the Great Depression.
So yeah, while I really do hate the fact that this famous ship was scrapped, I completely understand why it happened. And ultimately, I do think that this was the right decision. Because what would you rather have if you lived during those hard times? Would you rather have an old ship just sitting in the harbor not doing anything? Or would you rather have this ship come to the shipbreaking yard and then have the scrapping process of this ship provide work to over 100,000 people? You have to remember, these people were struggling just to put food on the table for their families. So just think about what that must have meant to all of those families when this ship arrived to be broken up. So while it is a very sad end to the story of the Olympic, I ultimately think it was the right one. So while it is a very sad end to the story of the Olympic, I choose to think of her end like this. What was the purpose of the Olympic? Why was this ship built? Well, it was built to support people. You know, it was built to give them a safe voyage across the Atlantic, provide luxury, be safe, and just be an overall well-built vessel. And honestly, the Olympic did this proudly. Everybody who sailed on the Olympic had nothing but good memories of this ship. Now think of the Olympic's war record. Think about everything she did during the First World War. The ship performed admirably, showing support to all of those who sailed on her. I mean, good grief, the vessel earned the nickname Old Reliable, for goodness sake. And then, at the end of her life, she was able to show support to people once again through the process of her being broken up. So honestly, while it is sad that the vessel is no longer with us, I can't think of a more fitting end for good Old Reliable.
However, even with the scrapping of the Olympic, this did not signal the end for the golden age of ocean liners. In fact, that day was still far in the future. During the last few years of the Olympic's life, the Cunard Line was working on a brand new revolutionary ocean liner. Now, construction on this ship would be temporarily halted due to the Great Depression, but after the Cunard-White Star merger, construction on this vessel resumed once again. Now, the ultimate question is, what would this brand new ship be called? Well, at the time, the ship's only name was her hull number 534.
Now, there's a pretty funny legend out there about how this brand new revolutionary ship would eventually get its name. But before I tell you the legend, I need to give you a quick little history lesson. You see, the Cunard Line and the White Star Line each had their own system on how they like to name ships. And in the past, the Cunard Line always liked to name their ships with the two letters I and A at the end. So Lusitania, Mauretania, and Aquitania, just to give you a few examples. The White Star Line liked to do the same thing, but with the letters I and C at the end. So Titanic, Olympic, Britannic, Baltic, just to name a few examples. Okay, so now we're going to get into the legend. Now keep in mind, I don't know if it's true, but if you want my opinion, I think it is, because it makes a lot of sense. So even though this brand new ship was being built under the Cunard White Star Company, where the Cunard Line owned a majority of it, they were basically the one running things. And it seems like they wanted to have this new ship keep the old Cunard Line tradition of having the letters I and A at the end. And it seems like that they wanted to name this ship after Britain's most famous queen, who they were thinking would be Queen Victoria. And this would also match the whole Cunard naming scheme because the last two letters in her name are I and A. So hey, it works. So in order to do this, representatives from Cunard Line had to go and talk to the king and get his permission. So, according to legend, the representative of the Cunard Line went to the king and said that we want to name our brand new ship after Britain's most famous queen. And then the king misinterpreted that and said, "Oh, my wife would be delighted." And then the representative of Cunard Line was like, yes, your majesty, that's exactly what we meant. So it was ultimately decided that the ship would be named after the king's wife, Queen Mary. Now, as I said, that's a legend. I don't know if it's true, but honestly, I think it is. Now, this story was officially denied by representatives from the Cunard White Star Company, but still, with everything in the legend, it makes sense. So I really think that this is probably what happened, just no one wants to admit it.
And so it was decided that this brand new ship would be named Queen Mary. Now, what the people who were working on this ship at the time didn't yet realize is how big of an impact this ship would have on the world in the years to come. And that one day, this ship would hold the title of one of the greatest ocean liners of all time.
All right, everybody. Well, hey, that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. And yeah, guys, you now know the complete story of the Titanic sister ship, the RMS Olympic. I'd like to thank all of you for joining me on this ride as we've told the story of the Olympic. And in case you haven't guessed it yet, the next ship that we're going to be doing a new timeline series on is none other than the RMS Queen Mary. I thought it'd be cool to start the story of the Queen Mary at the end of the Olympic timeline series, since the construction on the Queen Mary was finishing up right around the time that the Olympic was being scrapped. So they kind of tie in together. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like, be sure to subscribe, and thank you all for all your support. Your support means more than you all could ever know, so thank you all so much. All right, everybody, well, hey, you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks to Patreon Captain level supporter Callum Whaley. Thank you so much for all the support, man.